Welcome to Candid Conversation. I'm here with Doyle today, and very excited to pick his brain a bit about something that both of us are passionate about, and that's justice and equity, especially in communities of color, in the Black community, and voter rights,
Yes.
and on and on. And so I want Doyle to share, and then I'll probably be probing him with questions about his experience in 1965 in Canton, 64 in Canton, Mississippi, and kind of what precipitated that and how you ended up in Canton, Mississippi in 1964.
In 1964, I was a seminary student at Lancaster Theological Seminary, Lancaster, Pennsylvania. And I was a middler student at that time in my career. And a call came out from the National Council of Churches for persons to go to the South and to begin the work of educating African Americans to fill in the extraordinary amount of paperwork that was required to vote. And it was called the voter registration era, and it was before that bill was passed, but it was that army of people, and I was one of just thousands of people, went to the South and worked in that period of time to sit down with folks in the African American community and go to some length to explain to them how they needed to fill out those things. And the problem that the African American community had, particularly for many of the older ones, is they didn't have the education to even read those pieces of paper and make any sense out of them. To fill in all the blanks and everything else, all it took was the missing of the dotting of an I and the crossing of a T or a period at the end of a thing, and they could be eliminated from voting. It was as simple as that. And for persons who, many of whom had not even an elementary education, it was impossible. But our job was to help them to move beyond that. And how much we were effective, I don't know, but at least that legislation was passed then and made a tremendous difference in the participation of the African American community in American politics. Not enough, but it certainly was a huge step in the right direction. But in the process of that, there was enormous suffering, mostly in the African American community, but also among those in the white community who were sympathetic to the causes that we were seeing in the Jim Crow era. I was one of those persons who left Lancaster Seminary with Dr. Gabe Thacker, who was a professor of theology at Lancaster Theological Seminary, and we, along with two others, drove to Nashville, Tennessee, where we parked the car at the university there, and it escapes my name at the present time.
Historic Black University.
Yeah,
right?
historic Black University there. And we, Dr. Factor had a professor he knew there who made the arrangements for us to do this. And so we got on the bus, got tickets from the bus and Trailways, and we went from there to Memphis and then to Canton, Mississippi.
Keep in mind, this is 1964.
1964.
This is a hotbed.
This was the time when they were pulling people off of buses, and they were so forth, and they were making no uncertain terms that we were not welcome there.
And you said you were wearing clergy collars, right?
Yes, we wore clerical collars to make sure that they knew who we were, so we were immediately identified when we got on the bus. And of course, once we got into Canton, Mississippi,
as troublemakers.
Well, as
advocates.
good trouble.
Good trouble.
Good trouble.
Good trouble.
As like we like to put it,
Yeah.
not so good trouble for those who were
Right.
opposed to it. And our job was to sit down with folks and help them to learn how to fill out these papers so that they could eventually vote. And we lived in the Freedom House. Dr. Facker and I, the two others, stayed at the Freedom House, and we lived in, I forget the black church that we lived in, but the black pastor there, an African American pastor, was welcoming us. And we slept in the basement of the church. We moved the furniture against the walls of the church for fear that they might blow it up, which they did in some instances in those days.
Yeah.
And so we had no bathing facilities or anything else. It was rough living. That was the least of our concerns at that particular point. We were able to sustain ourselves. And then during the day we would go and we would sit down with people and teach them how to fill out these forms, which were almost impossible even for anyone with an education to do. All you had to do, as I say, is miss a comma, a period, a cross T, or whatever, and it could be rejected. And I will never forget this woman who was well into her 80s, an African American woman who, while I was helping her, I don't think probably had even an elementary education, maybe 1 or 2 years at the most, and couldn't read, and it was a painstaking task to get her to understand what was in the writing on that piece of paper to begin with. But she was going to do it. She was determined, and I was just as determined to help her, if at all possible, to get to do that. And she said to me, she says, "I just want you to know that I'm so glad you're here, and I just hope that I get the opportunity to vote one time before the Lord calls me home." That woman was additional inspiration to me to say, I'm here for a purpose and I'm doing God's work in the midst of this situation. It was very difficult work, and we were threatened on a number of occasions. Canton, Mississippi, the courthouse for the county is in the middle of the community and has a community green around it. And there were businesses, small businesses, and a few small restaurants in the circle surrounding the courthouse at that time. And we had trouble. There were no McDonald's, there were no fast food industries in those cases down there. So it was hard to get food to sustain ourselves, but we managed. And the one Friday morning, we got there on Thursday morning early and worked on Thursday, and then on Friday morning we did a sit-in. And we had with us one of the black persons from the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee with us.
SNCC.
SNCC, as it was known at the time. And we went into this restaurant at the corner away from the courthouse, and about shortly after 7, there was an area in the back where there were 8 of us, as I recall. I'm not sure of that number, but it was somewhere in the vicinity. There are a few persons were from Eden Theological Seminary in Webster Groves, Missouri, who had joined us in the task, and they were living at other places. We stayed at the Freedom House in Canton, but anyhow, on that morning, they didn't serve us, and we sat there for an hour and a half until a little after 9 o'clock before they came over and asked us if we wanted any coffee or anything to drink, and took our orders, which we did. And then about 10 or so, we were ready to leave. In the meantime, while we were sitting there, where there were persons coming in and berating us and said, "We know why you're here, and we want you to go home, and want to get out of here," and spit on us and left us know, in no uncertain terms that we were not welcome. When we exited the restaurant, there were 4 or 5 members, I'm sure, of the Ku Klux Klan waiting for us, and we were lined up along the curb, and they began to kick us and to hit some of us, and spit on us, and letting us know in no uncertain terms that we weren't happy to be there. They weren't happy to have us there. And across the street from us were the sheriff's deputies from the county, who were standing over there watching all this, kind of laughing and making jokes and so forth, letting us know in no uncertain terms that they were not going to defend us or do anything to keep us. That was one of the moments when I really truly learned how important Dr. Martin Luther King's insistence that you remain non-violent. What they wanted more than anything else was for us to respond violently. And as a former Marine sergeant, that was not an easy thing for me to do, because I was fight fire with fire, and that was the way you were taught in boot camp and in infantry training and as a service person, and I understand that in combat. This was not that kind of combat. This was a combat of a different thing. This was a combat of standing for the right of all people, regardless of the color of their skin, their religion, or whatever. They had the right to vote, and that's why we were there and why we decided to do this.